There's so much wonderful stuff going on around Los Angeles. We had amazing panels yesterday, and one of our panelists wanted to remind you that there will be a march tomorrow at the corner of Florence and Normandy, starting at 1 p.m. to mark the 25th anniversary. Oh, 10:30 in the morning. There's cards with more information on the back table, so you might want to participate in that. And I want to encourage you to please participate in our oral history booth, that big black booth out there. It'll just take minutes. There's a lot of missing narratives, which is a lot of what this panel is about, that we're trying to capture. We've captured amazing stories that don't get attention in mainstream press. And these will be archived in USC libraries for posterity's sake. So get your story, your voice recorded, please. And wonderful student volunteers in their Rap USC t-shirts will be around coaxing you into the booth. So please say yes. Okay, with this, we're going to start our next panel. And this is a really exciting panel. And actually, these three panels have been instrumentally shaped by our students. So I really want to give a shout out to So-Yoon Chu, who is at me to pick this up more. Thank you. So, of course, LA is often thought of as Hollywood, and it's a big industry. But I think what is really exciting is artists of color who are getting their narratives out. And they've often had to be scrappy in navigating through the networks, the studios, and using creative ways to get their work done. But they're getting it done, and we have some great examples today. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, this has become a day about food, is ill with food poisoning.
Not from local.
Not from local. And not from USC either, I think. So unfortunately, Mauricio Mota is an amazing, generous, warm person who has an amazing story to tell. We're still going to tell his story. We still have his trailer. We have his PowerPoint. Colin is friends with him, so we are going to tell his story for him, but unfortunately, he's not here in body. But we do have a great panel, and I am really excited to hand this off to Colin, my wonderful colleague, rap co-PI, and we have these amazing award-winning artists. Thank you.
I'm so honored to be here with y'all today, and especially with these folks. I'm new to LA. I arrived last August, so this is these last couple of days have just been a remarkable opportunity for me to learn more about my new city and to, in the way that I knew coming out here, so many exciting things happening and so much promise and also so many challenges. And it's great to be in a room with the people who are taking on the challenges in these creative and productive ways. And right here and in this session, I hope we can dig into them as well. There's been a lot of talk over the last 2 days about sort of perspective and who tells the story and from whose point of view. And I think here we are taking that head on as we look back to the '92 uprising. So what we're going to do is I'm going to, at various times, kind of put on my Mauricio hat, which is not going to look really great on me, but I'll pretend, and I'll endeavor to channel some of his fabulousness. But mostly, we'll be able to dive in with Grace and Justin to talk about their work and their process and kind of why they do the things they do and how they do them. And let's be clear, to the extent that it's not obvious from what you see at the theaters, our colleague Stacy Smith at the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism and her team do a lot of work analyzing and documenting movies and television and have looked at sort of the top 100 films each year for the last decade, for instance, looked at what's going on in front of the camera and behind the camera, who's making the pictures, who's the director, who's on screen, who has a speaking role, who doesn't. And I won't bore you with the PowerPoint and the numbers. Let's just say the numbers for not white dudes are really small. The numbers of women directors, around 4%. The numbers of people of color, also you know, kind of in the low single digits, 3, 4, 5%. So these filmmakers, and in Justin's case, taking on the dual challenge of being an actor as well, have really gone against the odds in a real tough industry. And Mauricio likewise. And I think hearing a little bit about how they've kind of navigated these things ought to be both enlightening and inspiring. So with that really brief introduction, I think what we want to do is cue up the K-Town 92 trailer, right? Yes. Which is Grace's trailer. And it is out just now, right? Like this is
live yesterday.
Live yesterday. You guys, this is the first public screening, the second first in a row. It has an amazing website too, which I had a bunch of fun playing around with.
This is not a test. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department.
And there you can see looters running through the streets of Hollywood.
It's really important to get the point of views of the people who experienced the riots. I think there's a lot of people who have romanticized them.
And here we go. Once again, we got there just as this market was starting to be looted.
When you disagree with that verdict, as I did, express that rage and frustration, but don't take it out by looting, burning, and by shooting people.
The images that the media showed of Korean Americans to be very disturbing and very sensationalized.
Yes, the riots are a story, but let's remember what was the lead up to this. You know, the lead up to this was that there were 5 police shootings in 1 month, and the feeling that this had been allowed to continue and continue and continue.
I love this value. As immigrants, we came here.
Everyone who's viewing this will have to ask themselves one day, where were you when everything went down?
So as you probably read in the bios, Grace is a super accomplished filmmaker working in both documentary and narrative pictures, which I think is really interesting to be straddling that, those different worlds. And just maybe tell us a little bit about why you wanted to make this picture and a little bit about the interactive nature of it and how you've...
So first of all, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. So K-Town 92 is an interactive documentary for the web, and it's something that was sort of inspired by, over the past 25 years, sort of experiencing at every 5-year anniversary sort of dissatisfaction with the kind of narratives that are out there about the LA uprising. Just to give you a little bit of background, in 1992, I didn't grow up in Los Angeles, but I moved here in '97 to go to graduate film school. But in 1992, I was living in Seoul, Korea. And while I was there, I remember I was at a friend's house and somebody came in and suddenly said, "You have to go look at the TV." And on the TV were images of Koreatown burning. And for someone at that time, you know, I had never really seen any images of Asians in media, television or otherwise. And to see people, Korean people who look like me, sort of in hysterics, like in front of burned out, destroyed businesses, or, you know, Korean men like holding like M16, you know, on the roofs of, you know, businesses in Koreatown was incredibly shocking and just very confusing because it was also in another language that wasn't my own native language. I didn't grow up speaking Korean. And I think for me, you know, on top of it, the way the media in the US and Korea portrayed it, it was called a black riot, which was also very disturbing because for somebody who, you know, all of these images kind of playing up in my head. And then coming back to the US a few months later and sort of trying to figure out what this all meant in terms of how these media images that you know, have remained over the last 25 years. And when I learned maybe a couple years ago that you know, you've probably all seen or heard of these feature-length docs being made by National Geographic or History Channel or whatever about the 25th anniversary. I just had this feeling that, oh, I don't know if those stories are, if those stories are going to be satisfying to me again in terms of hearing perspectives I've heard just by people I know or in the neighborhood in which I live, which is Koreatown. So So I wanted to make this interactive film on the web that would both disrupt the media images and also uplift different perspectives that we hadn't heard before. So if you go to ktown92.com, which you shouldn't do right now on your phones because it's not good for mobile, but when you go there, what you see is just kind of a trailer, and then the player starts playing, random pieces of footage that range from that come from very different pots. Number one is interviews that I've shot in 2017 with a really diverse cross-section of Angelenos, 1992 footage shot by independent documentarians, sort of like this, some of the footage you saw back here. There's like news footage from 92 where there's like a lot of, narration by the newscasters talking about, what are they doing, burning down their houses, or, very sort of questionable kind of commentary. And then also B-roll or archival material from 92 and 2017. And they all coexist in the same space. And each of these pieces of footage are both disrupting each other and also allowing a conversation to happen between them. It's kind of hard to explain. If you just go there, you'll see what I'm talking about. And this was really just an opportunity to bring together all of these different voices in one space and, provide a different angle for stories that I haven't heard before, like, people who were in. I'll give you a good example. There's a young woman, African-American from South LA, who was being bused at the time from South LA to Westwood, I believe, to go to middle school. And she was on her school bus coming back, and the school bus was stopped at Florence and Normandy when Reginald Denny, the white truck driver who was being pulled from his car, was getting beaten down. So most of us see that really famous piece of footage. It's an aerial helicopter footage of him getting beaten, but she tells a story of how she saw that from her school bus with her peers and her experiences going through that. So that's the kind of different vantage point that I was aiming for with Ktown 92. The same event, but through different eyes.
So as you were compiling all these different sort of resources and arranging them and experiencing it yourself, did it change your perspective on what happened? I mean, did it influence you and how you, because as opposed to a straight documentary where you're telling a story, this is, it's much more emergent, and there's lots of different stories, and there's surprising stories. As you just...
Yeah, I think for me, there are so many stories, and there's no way to get all of them, and there's no one story or one narrative, and I felt like this form might sort of, indicate some of that. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, I think that this form sort of helped me illustrate that. As far as what I learned a lot just hearing different people's perspectives. There are definitely perspectives that I've heard just like talking to people or living in LA for the past 20 years that I wanted to dig deeper into. But for example, I didn't know that she would tell me her story about being on the bus. I didn't know that this guy who's a Libyan immigrant worked in Koreatown as a security guard in a parking lot, for 30 years, that he was also organizing Latino and Middle Eastern men to go, protect one of these businesses. So even the very category of what Koreatown is shifting. And so that's really interesting to me as well, because just like South LA is not a monolithic African-American neighborhood, which it was often portrayed back then, Koreatown is not a monolithic Korean community. I mean, I think for me, like the erasure of Latinos in all of these stories is something that just kept coming up over and over again. And for Ktown 92, I only seeded it with like 25 interviews at the start. It's something that's going to evolve and grow, and hopefully with people's feedback, we can continue adding to the story archive.
So maybe we can, just to bring Justin into this and his work, sort of pivot and cue up Justin's trailer, and we'll kind of switch from this sort of interactive documentary approach to what it looks like to do storytelling from a director's perspective and take on this story.
What followed the jury verdict in the Rodney King case was a tragic series of events for the city of Los Angeles.
I can see the light on the other side. Everything's gonna be just fine with a little more time.
When's it coming out?
I think, so Samuel Goldwyn bought the film, and I think their plan is tentatively August 18th, I think, mid-August.
All right. So tell us more about this film and why you wanted to make it. And
Yeah, I mean, I've been acting for about 16 years, and you know, just constantly being a part of other people's stories and you know, not really having any input. How at least Korean American males are portrayed in the media. You know, after a while, I mean, and I've been very blessed. I've been able to consistently work over the last 16 years, but you start to get really frustrated with, you know, not having input on more of like the foundational story aspect. So, you know, I directed my first film about two just regular kind of Asian kids that grow up in Hawaii, and you know, it's a total like stoner flick. These guys are total idiots, and that was like, you know, my first foray, and that was really great because I learned a lot of lessons with that experience on the type of storyteller I wanted to be, and it was a great practice run. I guess with this film, how it came about was, you know, I'm a Southern California native. I went to USC, and I was born in Garden Grove, and I had a really interesting upbringing because, you know, I grew up in the suburbs, but my dad, you know, my family, my mom and dad wanted me to go to a nice public school and all this stuff. My dad every day drove an hour to an hour and a half to East Compton, and he had a shoe store. He sold athletic shoes, and when the riots happened, on the last day of the riots, we got looted. You know, at the time I was 11, and the perspective I had was, you know, the perspective of an 11-year-old. And if you notice, that girl in my film, Camilla, she's 11. So it's really a lot from her perspective. But looking back now, 25, because, you know, tomorrow is the 25th anniversary of the riots, which is why I think it's so great that, you know, Grace and I are, you know, telling these stories from different perspectives. But you know, I just felt like there was these other films that were being made by filmmakers I truly respect, and everybody should have the right to tell their perspective on an event. I should be able to make a movie about Napoleon if I want to, but you know, having experienced the riots and having it affect my family, I would feel extremely guilty if I didn't add my 2 cents. Yeah, I set out to make this film about you know, it happens during the first day of the LA riots, but it's rather than focus on what caused that or the actual rioting, because to me, like, we can watch a doc for that. We can watch news footage for that. What was interesting to me was the time and place, the sort of how people were thinking at the time, and just telling the story from actually the neighborhood, rather than making it some sensational, you know, Hollywood story. My film essentially is a film about friendship with this 11-year-old African American girl and this mid-20s Korean store owner. So that's sort of like the gist of why I wanted to, you know, make a story about the riots.
And so how did you go about kind of constructing that story? Recognizing that's a human story at some level, right, this friendship, but
Yeah.
setting it in the context of this particular moment in history. And how did you, like, so as compared to Grace, right, who has all these different kind of views and interviews and describing what the lived experience was, how did you think about, you know, imagining that moment and telling it and capturing it in the story?
Yeah, I mean, you know, without getting super, like, artsy, fartsy bullshit. I mean, you know, the type of stories that I like are the type of stories that unite us and also allow us to see how much we need each other a lot more than we think. And also, you know, this particular film, I wanted to show what happens when we don't talk to each other? What happens when we don't communicate? What happens when we're on our own islands and we just are so, you know, egotistical about our own beliefs? How, you know, to me, the people who suffer and the people who lose out are the innocent people, and also you lose aspects of your life that are the most precious to you. And this girl is like the metaphor for that, that bridges these two communities.
And so did you, as you kind of imagined telling this story, did you have a goal or an outcome? Was there some kind of thing you're trying to provoke, or is it just telling the story? Or how do you think about what it leads to, or the experience for people who watch it?
Well, I knew I was going to have to answer to a lot of people, because it is a really, it's an event that was, you know, not a pleasant thing in LA history. But you know, for the most part, for me as a storyteller, the thing that I can offer is telling it from my perspective and through my lens, and that just happens to be a Korean American, you know, man's lens, you know, but also being sensitive to everybody else who is involved. So, you know, Mexican people are in the film, but also, you know, like the girl's brother, Curtis Cook, we talked a lot, you know, and I didn't want to sort of repeat like stereotypes such as like the angry black man, you know, and I wanted to make sure that if I was gonna have like hate in this, or anger in the story, that it's all justified. He's not just angry for no reason. Like he has every right to be angry, but so is everybody else in the story. You know, everybody has a right to be angry, and that exploration for me is worth, you know, putting out there. But for me, it's like about truth. I mean, you know, honestly telling a story, and for someone to watch it and say, oh wow, I viscerally can feel what these characters are going through, regardless of their race or color.
So maybe, thank you. And so maybe now we'll show Mauricio's clip. I will not take the applause for him, but we could, if you cue up that last one, and then we can kind of broaden the conversation to sort of where things go from here, and really how you know, hear a little bit more about how you guys each navigated the challenges in front of you.
Grind me thirsty, grind me thirsty, grind me.
We urge you to speak up and give someone with no voice a voice.
We do what we need to do to survive.
Where were you last night?
How about we meet up later and I'll help you out?
So what do you want? I want to win. I'll dance with Caleb.
Not buying drugs.
But you said you'd do anything.
This wasn't my back, remember?
Grind me thirsty, grind me thirsty, grind me thirsty. Get on, 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 get on.
So I'll just try to do, I'll do what I can to kind of talk about this, and maybe you can fire up the PDF just so I can have something to talk to. But obviously a very different genre, based just from the previews, also a TV show in its 5th season, I believe now. Also, you know, in part because of that, reaching a different profile of folks, and reaching, I think it's in the top 3 shows on Hulu. About 5 million people follow it on social media. So it's a pretty interesting, you know, the other end of the funnel in some sense, in terms of a mass market approach to reaching a lot of folks. And what is interesting about Wise Entertainment and Mauricio and Katie's team is that they have a pretty involved process that, as you can see, kind of allows them to really dive into the creation of this community. So they start with working with the community to understand the issues, to working with leading community organizations to understand who they're talking to, so they can create a story that is meaningful and consistent with the lived experience of the people in that universe that they've created. In this case, East Los High, Latino high school in Los Angeles. And so these are some of the organizations that they work with in kind of constructing that story and identifying the issues that people and the opportunities and the sort of all the sensibilities in that world. And you can see there's folks who don't agree with one another, which I think is quite interesting. You have, sort of the Catholic Church as well as Planned Parenthood in conversation around the table with the writers, helping them to kind of understand the dynamics of that particular environment. They try to do it in the context of story. So it is, not unlike Justin said, really trying to tell a great story that embraces the complexity of social issues in a real way, in the kind of the Norman Lear tradition. They have to take it on creatively, as and I hope we get into this in a moment, but really leveraging foundations and leveraging non-traditional sources of financing to be able to make something that the studios are otherwise, at least in the first instance, resistant to doing. So this is, it's localized. They have it's like all Latino actors. They film in Inglewood and all around in the actual places where this is taking place. They have a very strong transmedia strategy, which is built in from the beginning, and something that I hope we can talk about, that involves actors both in character and out of character, engaging with audiences, going deeper on the storylines, and actually going into areas for deeper exploration, for instance, teen pregnancy. And they really seek impact, and they do measurement around that impact to see if they're actually achieving the goals that they identify in the process of creating these shows. And so this is their first big show. They're working on a new show now, even as they continue to roll this one out. They have some great research suggesting that both in terms of having an impact on the community and in terms of representation, this is Latinos in front of the camera saying like they are the ones. Otherwise, there is no show on television like this, and there's no near concentration like this with these kinds of roles for Latino actors. In one particular instance here, you have a sustained collaboration because of the dynamics of the community on issues around teen pregnancy. So here they say a third of the viewers learned something about birth control and emergency contraception. 40 to 50% learned something about correct use of condoms. Everyone reported willingness to get tested and recommend service to others. So they had some real actual uptake with young people based on the dramatic storytelling that they've engaged in. We'll see if we can make this available to y'all if folks are interested. But as you can see, they really try to have this transmedia experience. So it's not just what you stream on Hulu or wherever you stream this stuff, but it goes deeper. It is on Twitter and on a variety of other different social platforms. And here you have a series of other kinds of both anticipated issues, for instance, contraception and teen pregnancy is something they knew going in was going to be a big thing, and then other things that were sort of around the Trump election and things that were emergent in the moment that they endeavored to respond to, recognizing that their community needed to hear from these actors and from the show. So there are just two quick examples here. One was around with Voto Latino, around registration, and again, a multi-organizational and a multi-platform effort to get people to register and vote. And then, which, as I said, this is sort of about the undocumented immigrant related in kind of post-Trump world. So there are a series of these activities, both anticipated and not, that emerge and that they're able to deal with because they have this platform. And the platform is the community, is the show, are the actors, and these social things. So there I have done a terrible job of channeling Mauricio, far less entertainingly, hopefully rapidly, however. And what I really wanted to do with that was to sort of add the transmedia, add a little bit of the conversation around how you make the challenges of dealing with Hollywood and kind of the traditions of Hollywood and the limits of what's possible or what feels like it's financially viable or appealing, and which, you know, clearly in this latest picture you have navigated wonderfully, both with Kickstarter and getting picked up, but also speak to the kind of the broader impacts that we can look to from both documentary and narrative work that can take on these really challenging issues, and the power of doing it with not the traditional storytellers, right, and engaging other folks in. So, I mean, maybe we can kind of talk about where you see K-Town 92 going, and how do you think about kind of multimedia or transmedia, or how it engages the audiences in ways that can be continue to generate energy and insight.
Right. I mean, it's the first kind of interactive piece I've done, and it was a really big learning curve. But it's been a space that I've been interested in. I mean, I work in a lot of different formats of filmmaking, whether it's narrative fiction filmmaking, documentary, long-form documentaries, shorts, and then now this web-based thing. And it's a really different way to think about how to, it's like a deconstructed documentary. And I felt that with all of the different kinds of voices and the lack of one narrative that I wanted to focus on, I felt like it was appropriate for this subject matter. I mean, I actually am interested to see what will happen. I mean, we just launched it live yesterday, and I've been getting reports. You know, I didn't even know if it was going to work. You know, like, you guys should look at it and tell me what you think. But, you know, I've heard reports from people saying, oh, I just got sucked in, and I was just like in there for like 40 minutes, you know. And it's really, you know, every experience is unique and different, because as you go in, the different videos circle through, and different videos correspond with other clips. And so I think, you know, I think we're going to learn a lot in the process of just having it out there, and how people are going to give us feedback.
And to me, it seems like for something that is, as you observed, so many different unique experiences in that moment, that to be able to allow people to kind of follow their own path and also be challenged by views that might be consistent or not consistent with their experience, just seems like tremendously rich and also kind of democratic in some sense.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, it's hard for someone who's used to like controlling the narrative, like, here's the argument I'm going to lay out, or here's the story you're going to follow. In this case, I had to sort of step back and it's like, okay, well, let's see what happens, because oftentimes, like in life or experiences, you know, you come across a perspective you may not have heard before, but it might sort of jog something else, something that you weren't expecting. You know.
So Justin, I should also note, has, you know, a pretty big YouTube presence, and his other, you know, kind of previous acting career, he's sort of like Grace, multimodal and dimensional. And I'm curious, as you think about this going out and recognizing it's, you know, not totally in your hands, is there a transmedia experience that goes with it? How does it like populate other places, or what kind of?
That's a really hard question.
You can take it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that. I guess, I don't know, I guess if it's a good film, people will find it. I think there's a lot of tools now that allow you to, you know, interact directly with your audience, which is really cool. And that's sort of what I've experimented with YouTube and all that stuff. And yeah, I mean, you know, just from the mere fact that a lot of my post-production was raised on Kickstarter, and to see the momentum it got just shows that, like, you know, me being able to interact directly with my audience is incredibly valuable, and that, you know, you get instant feedback. If people don't like what you're trying to make, they're not going to support it, you know, but if they feel like it's something worthwhile and they want to support you as an artist, they'll speak up with their dollars, and that's something that's incredibly useful in this day and age with making your stories or getting them financed.
So did you, before you went to the Kickstarter campaign, did you raise money or try to raise money in other ways, or get it made in more traditional ways? What was your approach to, how did you end up there, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I did go to a few production companies, like traditional production companies, and the type of stuff they were saying was so stupid. I mean, they
They said you need all white characters in
well,
this?
there were suggestions like that. Like, you know, there's in entertainment, like, it's such a weird thing because it's art, that meaning commerce. So, and whoever has the checkbook kind of calls the shots, you know, and they can influence how you're gonna present your art. And, you know, right off the bat, they were like, you can't make it black and white. And I said, why not? And they, you know, they said, well, because you're not gonna be able to sell it. No one's gonna watch it. No one's gonna be interested. And I'm like, I beg to differ, because black and white is a color, and there's all the shades in between, and it's just a different way to tell a story. The other stupid thing they were saying was like, can like a white cop show up in the middle of the film? I'm like, no. Like, there's no.
It's like, that's when, what white cop, what actor would it have been, do you think?
Like, I'm friends with, like, you know, Miles Teller, and they're like, can Miles show up in the middle of the film, like, and say, it's dangerous here, you guys should leave? And I mean, like, if he, I mean, there was just no, there weren't white people in you know, South Central or whatever during the riots. I mean, and the few, I mean, look what happened to Reginald Denny, you know? Like, I don't think the cops bounced, you know? They set a perimeter around, you know, so the riots wouldn't spread to, like, Beverly Hills or the Palisades or Malibu or Santa Monica. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. That's the most ridiculous thing. That's not the story I want to tell. But yet they had the checkbook. So I had to politely say thank you, but no thanks. And my funding came independently. Like, it just, and that was the other thing that was a little bit discouraging was, you know, all the really rich people that I knew that told me, hey, when you make your next film, let me know. When you actually pick up the phone and say, hey, remember when you said that? They all scatter like cockroaches, you know? So, you know, it's like, it's tough. I mean, it's tough, you know, like, and how much integrity and how true do you want to stay to what you want to say, but there's also that sort of pull of like, but I want to get this made, so how much do I compromise? And at least with this, I just didn't want to compromise. So I found the money just like by tiny increments. I mean, you know, and you know, you just start with the low-hanging fruit, like friends and family. Then you reach out to people who, friends of friends who know investors or people who just are incredibly wealthy and care about the arts. And, but, you know, like, it was so hard. I mean, there was a time when, right before we started, I knew I had to start in the summer because, as you can see, one of my leads is a minor. So I need to shoot in the summer because during the school year, it just comes like a whole set of problems with like them having to do school during the shoot and all that stuff. So there was a point where I talked to my producer and I said, what is the bare minimum to make this film for? Like what, like we try to ask for every favor and he told me a number that I just was like, there's just no way. Man, there's no way, but like, I was like, let's do it. You know, and that's indie filmmaking. You just got to be really scrappy, but I felt that if I stayed true to the movie that I wanted to make, people would respond, and I was lucky this time. I mean, I just happened to be right this time, but yeah, the financing of storytelling is an incredibly hard kind of world to navigate.
Was the experience with Kickstarter positive, or did that have any, besides getting you money, did that change your trajectory?
You know, yeah, Kickstarter works in like a few ways, you know. People think that Kickstarter is just used for the financing, but no, it's free marketing, you know. It's so incredible that if it gets momentum, people spread it across all social platforms, and it's almost a great way to market, to get buzz around your film even before you shoot the film, or in my case, when I was doing post-production on the film, you know, we hadn't gotten to Sundance yet, but people were already starting to become aware of my project through Kickstarter. So, you know, people like NPR or, you know, a lot of news publications were reaching out for interviews, and I wasn't even done editing a film. So that's an incredible, useful tool to have. And also, you just get feedback on whether people respond to it or not, you know. And in my case, people just happened to be very interested in the topic and what I was trying to do, and that was really encouraging to experience as well.
And they don't ask for additional actors or plot changes.
Yeah, they don't ask for, they don't have any input. But you know, also another cool thing was when we put it out on Kickstarter, people were, not just financially, but also service-wise, were offering their services. Like I had composers that were reaching out asking if we need additional music, or like editors saying, if we needed their services, they would do it for free. So it's awesome. It gets the community really involved in your project.
So could we talk a little bit of whether about K-Town 92 or other, the many other things you've worked on, what's been your experience in sort of the funding process and the getting made, and like them saying, you want to do what?
Well, I don't really, I think I sort of gave up asking people who would say things like that to me. The only reason my career has even moved forward is because I generate my own projects, and that takes like, I want to do this, I want to look at this story, I want to look at this question, and if I'm not that interested in it, I'm not even going to have the energy or inspiration to like go after money, right? So, if I'm gonna, filmmaking is really hard. It's really time consuming. It's really exhausting. It takes a lot out of you, but it's also incredibly stimulating. And if it's not gonna be that, then I'm not gonna work on it. I think I've learned over the years that unless I really am committed to this idea or topic, I'm not gonna go for it. So then in a project like K-Town 92, which is very like a passion project, I just started it, and just started, putting out. It was funded by, we got some funding from organizations like California Humanities, Just Films, Ford Foundation, Center for Asian American Media, and other additional support from like public media, but I knew that I could do it sort of, I also set out knowing that it could be done for a much smaller budget, but it's still difficult to raise that money. It just sort of finds its way. I think I've learned over the years, like these projects, they will happen because we will it to happen, and whether it's crowdsourcing from individuals or grants or other people or companies, there are projects that are meant to happen, and whether they could still happen, but nobody might see them, but you still wanted it to happen, so that's how it happens. That's been my experience.
So what I would say from the Wise Entertainment perspective and East Los, they kind of made all the rounds in Hollywood and got the same question, like, could you add like a Filipino person and a white person and a purple person and and they would say like, no, this is not the United Nations. This is about a school in East LA with this population. And they, like you all, they ended up kind of moving to foundations who were able to kind of fund the launch of the show to sort of demonstrate traction and demonstrate what was possible. So it feels like that seed, and recognizing the TV is very different from film, being able to demonstrate their efficacy and the compelling nature of it. Then they were able to go back to Hulu and negotiate a very different deal once they had the data, right? They could say, look, you thought there was no market here, but in fact, there's a huge market here. And we've just showed you what that is. But it feels like that risk capital is hard to come by. And as you hear, it reminds me of entrepreneurs and artists, right, who are in this kind of thing. You just want to do your thing, but you spend all your time trying to raise money to do it. How about we bring the rest of you all into this conversation, who will no doubt have much more challenging and engaging questions of my own. So sing out. Who's got a question there in the back? Maybe we could get a mic on the left side.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation. A person from outside Los Angeles and the United States asked the question, and I don't know that it's been addressed in this segment and perhaps not earlier. Why was Koreatown targeted?
I mean, I could talk about it, and this is like a, this is a long conversation, but a lot of Korean immigrants came to the U.S. and there were no support organizations to help them kind of adjust and assimilate. And there's, you know, they came here and they were entrepreneurial by nature. They came into these communities, but they didn't assimilate. So they didn't become a part of the community. So they would come in, do their business, take the money, and leave. So there was a lot of animosity. I mean, you know, and also just difference in culture. I mean, you know, when Korean people, you give your change back, they don't count it out for you because they don't want you to think you're stupid. You know, like they're like, you can count your own change, and they also don't do physical contact because they feel like that's rude. On the other side, people are like, why are you so rude? From American standpoint, like, why are you not engaging with us? Not only that, you're treating us like, you know, you don't want us in your store, but we're here spending money. So there's a lot of miscommunication. There's no organizations to bridge that gap, and you know, it was just bubbling when the riots happened. Of course, they're gonna act out, and you know, people are gonna, especially when a riot's happening, it can start off with the Rodney King verdict, but then it can morph into just anger about everything. So, I mean, that's a short way to answer your question.
Probably a much longer question. Can we have a mic down here in front? Thank you. Oh, look, magic. Well done.
Oh yeah, hey, cool. So yeah, for Justin, I was just wondering, for the Black stories that are happening in your film, what was the process like of sort of writing the screenplay and like getting input and feedback from people you were working with to sort of make that an authentic story?
I mean, you know, my main thing was from the creation part of it, I wanted to serve two really underrepresented demographics in film and television, which were Asian American males and African American females. The girl, actually, when I started writing the script, was originally named Kamal. I have a friend named Kamal, and but I was thinking, man, this is a great opportunity to represent African American girl instead. So like this, that was sort of the decision, you know, that I made in terms of accurately representing. You know, I mean, I'm a Southern California native, and that's the thing about living here. You hang out with everybody. You know, growing up, I had, you know, Mexican friends, Black friends, Asian friends, and, you know, my childhood was the UN. You know, it was like, you know, you grew up with everybody, and you know, in terms of maybe research, I didn't go and like do interviews, but the only thing I could do is put on the screen my truth and my perspective of it all. But I did. I had long talks with you know, a lot of my African American friends, and I asked them, what would you think if this or that? And if you watch my film, I think I did a pretty good job of being very truthful, rather than sensationalizing it. It's just, it happens over a course of a day. You just see these people's lives just unfold during a day.
Back there and then over here, and then in the middle, I see.
Okay, hi, my name is Soon-Chi. I'm a student here. I'm so glad this panel came to fruition. And a proud Gook Kickstarter backer as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So I've been having Saigu-related, civil unrest-related discussions with my Korean American friends recently. Both of them are Southern California natives. And I've discovered two extreme ends in terms of opinions. On one side, I have friends who feel uncomfortable just even talking about it because it's hard for Korean Americans to even claim recognition for their pain because of the shop owner and community tensions that are happening. So this side of my friends are politically, civically not engaged with the community, and I have the other end of the spectrum who feel like, yes, definitely the pains and losses of the Korean Americans are very important, but in a way this is not this is not our event. Like, we should actually be allies to the ones who are the ones really suffering at that time. So I don't know. Like, by watching your film and also watching your documentary, Grace, I feel like, what is the message that you would like to give to these younger generations post Saigu civil unrest? Like what you mentioned, how your African American friends would feel after watching your film. What do you feel like? What do you want Korean American teenagers and my friends to feel when they watch your respective creations? Thank you.
Well, for me, my dad is in the film with me, and when I first, started doing my research and watching news footage and stuff for when I was writing it, part of that process was, getting my dad involved and getting his personal experiences with the event, and he just was like super confused. He was like, why do you want to tell the story? Why do you want to bring up like stuff that was not pleasant? Why, like, he was totally like, why do you want to bring up the past when it's behind us? Let's move forward. And that's when I really had to sort of think about, why do I want to tell this story? And it was important for me because, I'm a millennial, and a lot of people that are younger than I am don't even know what this is. They don't know what this event was about or what caused it, or and we're living in a country right now where in some ways it's worse than what it was 25 years ago. So to me, that's super important that, like, we gotta show that that was it was a riot. People were angry, and why were they angry? Let's talk about that. So my film, I felt the ultimate goal is I wanted to start conversations, and for people to talk about what caused it and all of that, and I feel like that's the value of it. And if we look, this is like I'm not a politician, but the way I see things right now, like, we're living in a country that's so divided right down the middle, and it's, my film, what I want to say metaphorically is, it's okay to disagree. It's not okay to hate. It's not okay to hate each other. I think that's not constructive. And when you do hate each other, you see kind of what happens through this film. So I guess that's where I feel it's valuable to talk about it, even though certain people want to put it behind them.
I'll tell you a story. I had another film I made a few years ago called American Revolutionary about Grace Lee Boggs, who is this Chinese-American activist in the black community in Detroit. And I had a screening in downtown LA, and this young Korean-American woman came up to me afterwards, and she was just really excited because she'd never seen images of somebody like this who had devoted her life to social justice, an Asian-American woman. And she said, I want to talk to you about a story that I have that, I want to tell you about. And so we met for coffee, and I was excited. What is this story going to be? It was a really important story to her. And she said, have you ever heard of the LA riots? And I'm like, of course I have. It's like this huge event, and it had such an impact on my life. And she said, I never heard about it before, until I took this Asian American Studies class at UCLA, and she was writing a research paper on it, and she was in the library and doing, sort of looking up the FEMA victim book, and she found her grandparents and parents' names in that book. Wow. And suddenly, like, all of these things made sense to her in her life. Why, certain circumstances that happened, and it was just such a moving, like, epiphany for me. Like, we don't talk about these things, and we don't talk about them to our own detriment. And it's okay to have, like, this statement, like, maybe people don't want to talk about the trauma that they experienced, or maybe people just want to sort of, ignore the fact that, there are some racist behavior happening by Korean Americans in South LA, or disrespect. But we have to talk about those if we want to sort of move forward. And I think what I wanted to do with K-Town 92 is bring a lot of these different kinds of perspectives together, not just Korean American, but from also African American, Latino, there's a Muslim American voices in K-Town 92. And if they all sort of coexist and have a sort of, in that same space, are kind of having a conversation with each other or with you, then maybe we can sort of move forward.
I feel like those are both really helpful responses, and I feel like in Justin's case, you give them a non-traditional perspective, a lens to understanding, and we may understand things through documentary, but also through just narrative storytelling. It's just such a different kind of experience, and we'll reach a wider audience. So to me, that seems exciting to just give them the opportunity, but then also to provoke the conversation that you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. To enable some sort of a common experience that you can engage. You can, again, agree or disagree on it, but you can at least interrogate it. Mm-hmm. And then the materials that that Grace has assembled is just such a rich repository of all these different perspectives, where you really, and you have kind of abdicated your directorial seat in some sense, right, by saying we're going to have this wide representation of voices, not my view, but all these different views in a very light way that allows that kind of exploration. So I think they're real, and their juxtaposition of these two things is just really exciting to me. We had another.
Yes. Hi.
And then down in front.
So I just want to echo your sentiment about being able to disagree but not hate. And so on that note, I also wanted to just follow up on the conversation of this target and this unfortunate misinformation that occurred. So during that time, some of us were on the receiving end of that police brutality. And growing up and seeing that video of Latasha Harlins, which somehow there's an invisibility to that brutality against women of color. And so my point is, or my question really is, do you have that narrative for these women of color from South Central LA that, unfortunately had these confrontations with the Korean American store owners in our neighborhoods, and is that in your film? I promised to watch them, and I haven't. I just want to know what's your take on that, and if that narrative is part of your film.
Yeah, I mean, it was a consideration because Latasha getting shot in the back, like that was a huge tension point between the Korean and Black community. So it was definitely a consideration when I was writing the film. And you see in my film, the 11-year-old Camilla, she's drawn to this story. She's friends with this, and she's the bridge. So, I guess that incident is the story that I didn't want to tell, because that's something that we can watch, like the news footage and have a discussion, right? But for me, if I had an opportunity to tell my story, my film is about friendship. It's about the friendship between this girl and this store owner. And I want, ultimately that's what I wanted to focus on, because I'm trying to move forward. And it's in there though, because in the beginning of my film, the Korean store clerk, she goes ask for some change, and I told her to go get it, and he pulls a gun on her, and so it's in there. And it was something I was thinking about. But that particular incident, how much it plays in my film is just this much of it.
Down here in front of you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, please. In K-Town 92, it was important for me to include perspectives that talked about people in South LA being, having these experiences of going into Korean stores, liquor stores, or, other businesses, and feeling disrespected as young women of color. I mean, specifically young women of color. And, the Latasha Harlins incident was a tragic, horrible incident for everybody concerned. And I just feel like a lot of times Korean Americans don't want to talk about it. And for me, it's really important to talk about it because we have to, there's incidents like that happening still today. I think there was like some video going around from some beauty store owner in North Carolina who had this woman in a chokehold, African-American woman. And it's just like, oh my God, 25 years later, it's the same kind of thing. She didn't die, and not that that was going to happen, but that kind of violence is something that we would rather, some people would rather put under the rug, but we need to have that kind of conversation amongst ourselves. So it was important for me to include those perspectives in K-Town 92.
Were there a couple more questions? These two, maybe we take them in take them together as we just have a few minutes left.
Hi, my name is Joanne, and thank you for this panel. Just a small comment and then a question. My parents were personally affected by the 1992 uprising. They were business owners in Koreatown on 8th and New Hampshire, across the Taco Bell. So I wanted to ask, maybe Justin, in your own life, and particularly for Grace, while making K-Town 92, in your process throughout filmmaking, and in the people that you've met, have you found that the reflections from the past have informed the present or maybe even the future in terms of community building or how they now live their lives? Like, what do you think, what do you hope to inspire by creating the content that you do?
There we go. Well, yeah, I mean, for sure, I think people when I was talking to people for K-Town 92, sort of start out by talking about their experience in that event, and then also sort of bringing it forward and how that has, affected them. And yeah, for sure, definitely people have, a lot of people I've interviewed are like working in sort of community-based organizations or as organizers. There's one woman in K-Town 92, she had a Korean immigrant woman, she had a clothing store in Slauson Swap Meet, and she, at the time, was just trying to survive. She just, their store didn't burn down, but she definitely had some very strong experiences of, very strong emotions. And I don't know if she attributes it to 1992, but since then she's become an organizer for senior citizens in Koreatown, in terms of making sure that Korean American low-income immigrants have a voice, have some kind of political, capital, because she didn't have that back then, and other people too. I think some of these young women that I mentioned who were middle school students, they went on to become one is Aurea Montes Rodriguez from Community Coalition in South LA. She went on to devote her life to building healthier communities in South LA. So I think there's for me, to see how people move forward is just to see where they were then, whether they were in middle school or working in a store or whatever, and then what are they doing now.
Last question.
So thank you. My name is Lavonna Lewis, and I'm struggling with this issue of authentic voice. And beginning with the kind of comment, entertainment is art plus commerce. And for commerce, it's not real unless you put in this additional thing that I think should be part of the story. And so my question is, how do you maintain the integrity of the process when you got all of these demands on, you need to make this adjustment, you need to bring in this group, if you really want the funding, you need to do A, B, and C. And so how do you, again, keep in mind that this is the story I'm going to tell, not 50 other stories, but this is the story that I want to tell, and it has merit on its own, and it should be able to stand on its own. How do you kind of manage that process?
I think Mauricio did an amazing job gathering information. I think analytics is how businesses run these days. All the online platforms like Amazon, Netflix, and Hulu, it's all numbers. So I think that's a tool that people can use to try to, ultimately it's their choice. They can shut you down or green light your project, but I think that's incredibly smart to bring them actual hard numbers that they cannot deny. And that goes for, because that's numbers they can use for commerce. So you say, oh, these people, there was an article that came out recently that said that per capita, Asian and African Americans go to the movie the most. And those kind of numbers, when you compile them in a compelling way, I think that's one way to go about it. But it's tough. I don't know. It's just you got. I guess another way, which is what I did, is just to raise it independently and show them what is possible and how like people will come. You know, I went to Sundance with my film, and you know, in my section, there were films with like Casey Affleck, Rooney Mara, Michael Cera, and we got the audience award. So that is incredibly encouraging because it wasn't the jury members that decided whether we got this award or not. It was the people who watched the film, and that film was diverse, and they put their votes in, and we were validated, and it was crazy. It was just a bunch of Asian and Black kids that made a film that people loved, and that's, you know, for me it was just putting my money where my mouth is and showing them, and hopefully if I make a few more like this, I build sort of like, you know, another big thing is building a brand, you know, and I build sort of my voice as a brand, and hopefully that'll make it a little bit easier when I try to make my case to some of these companies when it comes to diverse casting.
Oh, I mean, I just try to make independent. I just try to be independent. Like even, you know, I was making this short concurrently with, as part of K-Town 92, I made a short that's airing tomorrow on World Channel that looks at, it's called K-Town 92 Reporters, and it looks at 3 journalists of color who are at the LA Times, young journalists who were sort of navigating, you know, being in this mostly white institution, but telling the story, sort of how the racial tension on the streets was sort of mirrored inside the newsroom. And I just told the story of these 3 journalists, one African-American, one Latino, and one Korean-American. And they're very blunt about their criticism of how this event was covered by the paper of record. And at one point there was like talk about, oh, do we try to partner with the LA Times or, you know, whatever. I was like, it's not really about the LA Times, or are we going to offend them or whatever. It's really about these people's experiences and the story they want to tell. And because I have, you know, limited resources, like I don't have anyone to answer to except for myself and the kind of story I want to tell. So that's how I deal with it.
Well, that was a great question to end on, and I think you get a sense of sort of just how challenging it is to be true to the story you want to tell and the challenge of creating great art. So please join me in thanking these fabulous folks.